No, I'm fine.
This is what it's like to be in a writer's room. And right around this time, somebody goes, "Shut up! Pay attention." But this panel is going to be about what the writer's room is like, how the week is broken down, and just about some of the things that we've all learned in the group dynamic. Unlike the other panels, with 4 of the 5 of us, how many are there people here? 4 of the 5 of us are mostly from comedy. Jan is a drama writer.
I'm the only one on the panel who is not funny.
Oh, Jan, you just were funny. So we are going to start. Since I know everybody on this panel really well, I would screw up if I did their bio. So I'm going to let you guys just say some career highlights and introduce yourselves, and then we'll dig into the questions.
Well, actually, in the 9th grade, I won 2nd prize in the Palms Junior High School Science Fair.
I'd have to speed it up.
I still have my trophy. I was a playwright, and then I came out here, and I crawled under the stage and wrote questions for Shop Till You Drop, game show, and then I started writing Half Hour, and then after 2 jobs, I got a job at Friends, where I was for 5 years. First year of which Jeff and I were in the same room. And then after that, I worked with Jan on Once and Again, and then Sex and the City briefly, West Wing, and now I'm doing a pilot.
Excellent. Mr. Kogen?
I've been mostly following Alexa's career.
Great. How's it going?
It's good. It's doing good. We're very excited about that West Wing thing. What's my story? I have like 2 good credits and a lot of other credits. I have Simpsons and Frasier. And then the rest don't matter, right? And 4 Emmy Awards and a Humanitas Award. I'm not going to tell you what for. And I started by getting sandwiches for people, delivering sandwiches, and then eventually getting a job as a runner, and then working all day, delivering more sandwiches to people, but on the show, and eventually writing a Spec script that the people on the show said, "This is great," but didn't do anything with, and then showing that script to somebody else, and then getting a job.
I think the main thing people have learned today is get people sandwiches. That's the single best route into show business that you've learned today.
Sure.
Dan?
Well, I've learned something already just on this panel, Alexa. I didn't know there were questions on Shop Till You Drop.
Yeah, they were like about like different colors, and I had to work the scoreboard too.
Well, that's another way into the entertainment industry. Boy, now I don't even remember who I am or what I've done. I started as an independent filmmaker in New York, and I spent a lot of years making a very strange feature. It finally got finished. I was completely broke, but it premiered at Sundance, and it was very, popular and well received, and I got an agent and a distributor for the movie. And because I was completely broke, I thought, well, this would be a good time to try to get like a Hollywood type writing job. And so I had this little pitch, this little idea. I had this kind of a smaller agency, and they said, "Oh, just come out, and you don't have to have an idea or anything." So I got there, and all the agents in the agency were there, and they said, "Okay, let's hear your pitch." And so I sold a pitch to Gina Davis's company. She had seen my film. And it was for me to direct and write and for her to star in. And I thought, wow, that was easy. It didn't even involve sandwiches. And, well, believe it or not, that never happened. I know it's hard to believe, but there was actually a moment when I was naive enough to think that it could be that easy. Anyway, I kept writing features for a little while. I had one at the Sundance Writers Lab, and then I really lucked out because while I was there, I met a guy named Jason Katims, And he was working with Winnie on My So-Called Life, and then he created the show Relativity with Ed Zwick and Marshall Herskovitz. And that he asked me to write for Relativity. And I had never thought of writing for TV. I was still, I was getting jobs writing features, but nothing was getting made. And so that's how I got into television. And then I've worked on Once and Again, Chicago Hope. I sort of made a transition to cop shows by adapting James Ellroy's memoir about his mother's unsolved murder, My Dark Places. And then I worked with Michael Mann on Robbery Homicide and got into Gun Battle, and then I worked on Cold Case, and then I worked on Kidnapped, and I write pilots.
That's good. That's, oh my God. Her career is so much more interesting than mine. He'll do it, too.
That was a good example of what we in the room call a room bit.
Yeah, and
Is when someone says something joking, but someone carries it that
yeah,
far.
and
Jay, come back.
The problem is, if I start talking, then he will
He's
return
gonna bring back a
with
sandwich.
the sandwich.
Yeah,
and
you
there-
Yeah, he'll find a sandwich and bring it down.
The bar.
All
He's
right.
gone, by the way. I think that was it. Oh, yeah, there you go. That's good.
Room bit, ladies and gentlemen. That is a room bit
Very
right
nice.
there.
He's professional.
Very good. Very
Yeah.
good. Very well done. That's not a sandwich, by the way.
Best I could do, short order.
I never learned to do what Jay just did, so I did not have the leg up in the business that he did with sandwich carrying skill. No, I started out writing spec scripts, and one of the spec scripts that my partner and I had written got noticed by Marta Kaufman and David Crane, who had just moved out here to do the HBO series Dream On, and we were hired as staff writers on that show, where we stayed for 5 years and ended up running it for a couple of years. And then we sort of followed them to Friends, and I worked on the first year of that show with Alexa, who was sort of my room buddy on that show. And then during that season, wrote a pilot called Partners, which got picked up by Fox and ran for one glorious year on that network before being cruelly canceled. And then split with my partner and went to work on Will and Grace. Started on episode 4 of Will and Grace and ended up staying with that show until I was out of Gay Jokes, which took about 6 years. And left Will and Grace after running that for a few years, and then made a deal with Touchstone TV, and they deployed me on Desperate Housewives, where I worked last season, and now I'm going to work this season, and I wrote a pilot. If you read my bio, you know that the reason I'm here today is my wonderful pilot didn't get picked up. So I thank you. Bigger. So thank you. So that's it. That brings you up to date.
I just wanted to say a couple words about the writer's room just in general, and then I'd love to just talk about literally what a week is like in a writer's room, and have some of you tune in, pipe up, speak up, somebody rewrite me. But what unwittingly prepared me for the writer's room that I didn't realize was going to prepare me was my family. And growing up around the table, everybody was very funny, very mean. No one really listened to what the person before had said. People were really loud and talked over one another. And it was really helpful if you had a story that seemed like it might be interesting. So I got kind of this urge to be heard, and also a resiliency from people being really mean to you if you said something dumb.
Nice family.
Yeah, really nice family. But the family was funny, and so you sort of learned about that room dynamic. The other thing, the place where I met Jay Kogen originally was, we were both involved with the Groundlings Comedy Group. And that was another place to, even though there wasn't a writer's room, you would exchange material with other people. You'd be in the dressing room, and people would be going, help me with this line, help me with this joke. And you also learn to not get overly attached to the material. It either worked or it didn't work. So those were both, if you can't grow up in my family, then the Groundlings is a good place for a comedy room. But those were just sort of the general feeling about it. What's great about a room is, as you know, if you're sitting by yourself writing, it can be very lonely. it's me, myself, and I, and if you've hit a wall, you're just there with yourself. In a writer's room, you can have a lot of camaraderie. You've got really smart people to help you problem solve, but we had Damon Lindelof here earlier today, and sometimes it can feel like you're on the island on Lost, where you're just going, I hate these people. I wish the others would take somebody. And, you're really stuck with those people. So those are just sort of some overall things, but I would love to hear maybe just for those people who've never been in a room, just pick a show that you've worked on, maybe something that you thought worked pretty well, and just talk us through maybe how a season goes. Like, I know, like I'm acting like I've just read about this. Like a pre-production period before you go into production, and then what happens once you're in production. So.
Oh, yeah, okay. My best experiences have been in rooms that were run extraordinarily democratically. I learned everything I know from David Crane and Marta Kaufman, who are about as good as it gets in terms of room running. And they were, one of the things, I think David's pathological dislike for conflict made him the ideal person to kind of manage the flow of a room. And he was always very good at making sure that everybody got heard and everyone was taken care of and everybody got to contribute to the debate. One of the things that I learned from him was we would really start on Dream On, and we did this to a certain extent on Friends, and we would really talk about the plan for the year. The first couple of weeks were always spent kind of saying, well, what do we want to accomplish this season? Are there certain themes we want to delve into? Are there certain relationships we want to unfold? Are there key events we want to get to in these characters' lives? I remember when we were doing Friends, Marta and David were really sure that the climactic episode of the season was going to be the birth of Ross's child. And so a lot of the map making in those early weeks was about kind of laying the groundwork of how we were going to get from the start of the show to that point. The funny thing that happened along the way was it turned out no one really cared about Ross's child, and they actually cared about Ross and Rachel, and what we ended up doing was the penultimate episode of the season was the birth, and the final episode was actually a major turn in Ross and Rachel's relationship. But anyway, we spent a lot of time talking generally about the year, and then that would kind of inevitably throw off in the same way, like planet formation, like balls of hot gas would coalesce around one idea for a story, and pretty soon we would start to see the markers of like where we were going to go week to week.
Jeff, why don't you? How many people were on the staff, and was everybody in the room for this discussion?
What do we have? A dozen writers on that show, roughly, and that was, I mean, we had
teams.
There were a couple of teams. Jeff Strauss and I were a team at that point, and there were two other teams.
Jeff and
Yeah,
Adam and Ira.
Yeah, so it was probably like, I don't know, 11 to 14 people, something like that. And we did it all collaboratively. All those early discussions, especially because we were birthing a series at that point. There was a lot of discussion of, we've made a pilot, now what does the series constitute? And of course, you learn things between the pilot and the series about maybe you cast someone that's a little different than you had in mind when you wrote the pilot, so you want to play to those strengths. I remember David telling me very briefly, I remember David saying the big romantic comedy couple in Friends when we conceptualized the show was Monica and Joey. They never thought it was going to be Ross and Rachel. And if you think about that pilot, it's Monica, the good girl, everybody's den mother, and the kind of bad boy actor across the hall. That kind of sounds like a romantic comedy. But it turned out that wasn't as interesting as what was going on between Ross and Rachel, and that kind of magnetized the show in a different direction. But a lot of those early discussions were people bringing their own 20-something experiences to the show.
Except for me.
That's an interesting segue to Alexa, and I would love for you to talk about what you were sort of alluding to there, is what your experience was like being. Were you one of the few women on the?
Well, I was
the only woman.
I was the only woman on staff. Marta was in the room a lot, so I wasn't literally the only woman. But there were a lot of times when she was doing other stuff where I was sometimes the only woman.
Except for Brown.
Except for Brownie,
Exactly.
That's right. Jay's wife was our writer's assistant, so she was truly my. It's amazing how that person becomes like the most vital.
She says it was horrible.
Yeah. She figures, I just did this little piece for This American Life, and Brown figures prominently.
Oh,
I'll
good.
have to let you know. But anyway, it's really odd because you come to represent not just women, but like African Americans. And gay people. Like, it's like, well, what do the Indians think? It's really weird. But I also was in a room of pretty evolved. I mean, everybody, and the nice thing about being in a room at the time with all these guys that had gotten out of college relatively recently is they all had to like take women's studies classes. So unlike other staffs I've been on where it was stand-ups who were in their 40s who hadn't. It
Who
was-
by then really thought, I hate women and I don't care who knows it.
Yeah, totally. So this was a pretty evolved group. Although I would also say pack mentality can bring out some fascinating colors. But you know, it's
Well, can you be more specific about what that is and how did you deal with it?
it's complicated. It's a really, and you know, the Friends room is notorious because of certain
Law was made
law was
in
made,
the Friends
right,
Writers Room.
Right. You know, but it's it's my favorite topic actually. Is the whole like, are women funny, and what kind of funny are we, and just like figuring out some things are advice that would be true for any gender in terms of just like keeping your ears open and being aware of what the vibe is. But I do feel like it depends on the nature of the room. And again, this was a room that David ran, who was gay, and Marta, who's a big feminist. So it was pretty safe to be a woman in the room in general. Like, it wasn't like a woman-hating room to begin with. So there was only sort of so far that we were sort of, it was acceptable to go in terms of, you know, jokes and stuff. Although we crossed over.
Yeah, there was an interesting thing that happened without singling out this writer by name because it wasn't his fault. But we did add one male writer in the spring.
Oh, yeah.
And it suddenly just totally changed the room. Like that one more guy, it suddenly was like, my ex-partner used to say, when you have a dog, you have a dog. When you have a dog, when you have two dogs, your dog has a dog. And then when you have three dogs, you have a house full of dogs. And that's what it was like. It was like a house full of
Into a
dogs.
house full of men,
And
yeah.
it just adding that one person, it suddenly became very frat boyish.
Yes.
Like all of a sudden.
No, it's complicated because you have to be game and not be, you know, it's like they can smell fear, so they'll definitely push you to, like, you know, get upset or be offended. And so then you find yourself, you know, going way out of the way to be, like, more disgusting and more offensive. And over the years, I've sort of gotten better at just trying to be myself. But there is an element of, like, I think the people that struggle are the ones that, you know, and also talent helps. Like, if you're good, then it tends to
Write
help
that down.
equal out, you know, or that you're an equal contributor. That makes a difference. But can I just say my weird little thing about
Yeah.
women in rooms? Well, one of the things that one of my first jobs, one of my bosses said to me, "I can't hear you." Like, he said, everyone's talking and I can't hear you. And I said, am I talking too quietly? And he said, yeah, and you're sort of talking in a way that isn't confident. And some of it is that I hear men's voices more easily than I hear women's voices. And I don't know if it's because I am one or what, but you can't make me work that hard to hear you because you're frustrating me. And it was really actually, I mean, he said it incredibly lovingly, but it was really helpful because it's like, it's not personal, but you have to be as confident. I mean, men will say anything and they don't necessarily. Well, this isn't true, because this was the room where everyone went, well, I feel bad if I say this, everyone, you know, and it's not this, but something like it, and I'm such a bad writer, and I'm bad in bed, but here's my book. You know, like, so it was a room full of self-deprecating people, which also makes it nice, but I have noticed men have a kind of confidence that, so I try not to do the, like, And also, the other thing is women, are creative in, I think, sometimes different ways collaboratively. This was a room where we were all allowed to pitch things that weren't completely figured out and just ideas and stuff, but I have this sort of feeling that I think of it as like setting the table, that when women offer up suggestions, oftentimes, you know, I would go, well, what about a thing where it's kind of like he lives on a farm, but maybe, and then some guy would come in and put the joke together and nail the words, and everyone would laugh, and it would be remembered as his idea. And it's a kind of like, to me, like, it's just like we're all collaborating, but and it isn't even necessarily conscious or selfish or anything like that. They're just, I started to learn to try to keep my mouth shut until I had something clear to say. And if I wasn't as confident about pitching a joke, I would literally like write it down and try to sort it out before I just started talking. So that's one thing.
Yeah, the joke pitching thing, just so you know, it's a big part about sitcoms anyway, what people do in sitcom rooms.
Jay, do you want to talk? I'm sorry, go on.
I was talking. I was in fact talking.
I know, I'm so sorry, because I wanted you to also just talk about what the week is like, too.
Okay,
Sorry.
fair enough. Now go get me some dinner. We're not misogynist at all. No, I mean, I was just going to say the basic thing is, through the week, Monday on a regular taped or filmed sitcom, there's a week, and Monday through Friday, or sometimes it's Wednesday, and they read on Wednesday and shoot on Tuesday, but it's basically a week. And the first day they read the script. After much pre-production, lots of scripts are written, hopefully, and then they'll sit down, the actors will read the script, and you'll go back and you'll get notes from the network, and you'll get notes from the executive producer about what is going to be changed. And everybody in the writer's room should have an idea of maybe what didn't work and what worked, and then that's where, and every day it's structure and scene structure, and then joke telling. So the jokes, that part about the joke telling is very important. Yes, the general idea of what should happen here is important too, but the person who nails that joke does get kind of credit, and you sort of think, oh, that guy's really talented. He's able to sort of get us through the next beat, because we're just sitting there waiting to go home. Everybody wants to go home, and the person who's able to tell that joke gets you home a little faster. So it really does help. So Monday's read through. Tuesday there's a rehearsal. Actors usually walking around, hopefully with the script in their hands. Some idiot actors are trying to do it. I've memorized the whole thing, and they just slow everything down. You want to strangle them. That's like they're ruining the jokes that you worked so hard because they're trying to remember it instead of deliver it. Then Wednesday, same thing. Hopefully they're holding their scripts with the new revisions. You've written all night. You've written all day Monday for the Tuesday rewrite. You've written all day night Tuesday for the Wednesday rewrite. Thursday, thank God, is camera blocking, and most of the time you get a little chance to work on next week's show, other shows, and then maybe some problems in this week's show. You have to go down, maybe a small group, a little joke party goes down and works on one little aspect of the
joke party.
Yeah, and then on Friday you're also mainly working on next week's show and making sure the table read for Monday is going to work. And then on show night, most of the writers, or many of the writers, go down to the show, and on the floor, especially on a David Crane show, they sit there and try to rewrite the show on the floor, which is a terrible idea, I must say.
I will tell you, though, to be fair, and Will and Grace, did anyone here ever go to a filming of Will and Grace? Okay, so you guys probably saw this phenomenon. I have never rewritten as much on the floor as we did on that show. It was alarming. I mean, between take one and take two, if there was a beat or a joke that did not work, the writers would go, and we would all get together and start pitching the robots. And we had one writer on staff, Laura Keitlinger, who was an unbelievably talented stand-up, whose sole job was to deconstruct the script and write new jokes. And so she would come in with typed pages of alternates for every beat. And so she would say, and she would push her way through the crowd with some unbelievable joke. And I would say a lot of what you see on screen in those Will and Grace episodes were jokes that were written 45 seconds before they were shot.
But there's a psychology to those things too, which is the jokes that got to Friday worked at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they did work at some point, and they're not working at that particular moment. And a new joke in front of an audience is always going to get a bigger laugh than an old joke. So the audience saw one joke, and then they see a new joke and go, ah!
Especially if
They
you
love
put the
it.
word ass or lesbian
Yeah.
at the end.
True.
So the audience in that really thinks they're really being super entertained by getting new jokes and all this stuff,
Yeah.
and the reaction's different. And also, we as writers like new jokes. We also we
Yeah.
get bored of jokes. So losing confidence in those things. I had an interesting experience where I worked on Malcolm in the Middle, which is a one-camera film show, and we wrote it. We rewrote it. We had a table read, and then we may have done one or two changes from the table read, and then they just made it.
Yeah.
And the shows were fine. They were terrific. They were really good. And everybody, and the showrunner was really happy with them, and fans of the show were really happy with them. And it's sort of like, just goes to show you that I think, sometimes it's execution. If the actor said it a different way, you wouldn't be there an extra 20, 25 minutes huddling in the
That's
thing
right.
to do it. But
I was
Yeah.
I was pitching on the set the first once and again I did, like, it's one of the actors fumbled a line and I was like, okay, well, what if she, and they just were like, Alexa, upset. Like, give her another shot at it. And I was like, you know, 'cause it's a mentality.
Right.
Of like, I'm not, okay, it didn't work, I need another one. And sometimes those
Yeah.
early ones are the best ones.
Yeah.
I want to ask Jan about what it's like working on a drama. If you wanted to talk about a room experience you've had working on an hour show, does it work really differently than the half
Oh
hour?
yeah, I feel like I'm an anthropologist in a foreign land. I mean, and actually, I think I got something in my eye because I'm crying, and that's part of working on drama. Yeah. Okay. So, at first, the shows I worked on didn't have any rooms, right, Winnie? No rooms. No rooms at the inn. Ed and Marshall worked with the writers more like feature writers. Like each individual writer would meet with them to go through the outline of the story, and the outlines were very brief. You know, they trusted the writers. The idea was that as the writer, you would create the value of the story in the writing. It was a very unique
just
idea
crazy.
that they had.
That's just crazy.
Nutty. So, like, they used to take a page and write, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for each act. And then you would sort of scribble down, you know, the basic idea of the scene, and then the writer would go off and write it. And it's funny because, you know, so that was sort of the culture that I was familiar with. And when I started working on more procedural shows, where they really had a room where every single story beat would be decided on in the room. Now, it's not like comedy. You know, in drama, you don't actually sort of write in the room. Do you guys write in the room?
Well, not
Sometimes.
first drafts. Not first drafts and rewrites, but yes, when
Some shows do, but
Yeah.
Shows
Yes.
do. That's all they do.
yes, not the best shows, I think.
no.
Well, you know, I'll tell you 2 other experiences I had because, you know, I worked on Robbery Homicide. It was Michael Mann's show, but it was run by an incredible writer and showrunner named Frank Spotnitz, and he had been on X-Files for many years. And they had a specific technique of doing the room on X-Files. And it was almost like a Japanese tea ceremony kind of thing. It was like, you would have an index card, and each story beat would be written in order. You know, sometimes you just kind of get the overall, like, outline. You know, like you say, okay, let's get the act end. You know, we
Yeah.
know this is going to happen here, and, you know, we know what the end is. Well, the X-Files and Frank Spotnitz's method was to do the story beat by beat in order. And when you got the beat, you would write it on an index card with a particular kind of handwriting that was similar to, like, when you went to elementary school and there was that thing at
Yeah.
top, you know, A, B, C. And part of the exercise was to write it perfectly so that it would force you to slow down and really think about it. And
That's cool.
if the handwriting wasn't perfect, you would have to write it again and it had to fit on the card.
I don't think I like that system. What?
Oh, I like it. My OCD is like,
If you don't like the idea later, change the
Fantastic.
card. You know?
Now, you know, like in the room that I was in last year on Kidnapped, like I would say, rather than an index card, this would be more like the tool in the writer's room.
What? That's terrible.
It's stuck.
You're really terrifying me right now.
I mean, we had this is
Toys.
Oh, this shoots objects.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
this elephant is made of masking tape. And,
I'm so sorry.
You know,
Did you make it?
No, Duffy Demetrius made it. But you know,
I made, oh, can I just,
Thank God this isn't being recorded. No, I lost one. I lost one.
okay.
It went from- Oh, here it is. Yeah.
we had a writer that made food into other food. So like he would make like meat into an eclair, like from dinner, and we kept it all in a drawer.
Yeah.
And then I made closed that, I was only allowed to use paper and tape for the taxidermy dog. So I would, yeah. Anyway, it is exactly what you're afraid
Victor
of.
Fresco.
Yeah.
Victor Fresco used to make like little miniature furniture and stuff out of gum wrappers and peppermint patty wrappers, and then if he didn't have enough wrappers, he would try and get people to eat the peppermint patties.
Which is, and all of this sort of time-wasting, goofy stuff is necessary at some point to actually write a show. Just like when you guys write your scripts, you don't sit there just, okay, for the next 4 hours I will write. And you just start writing. You write a little bit, then you think about something, and you make a phone call, and you check the internet, and then you go back to writing a little bit.
Did you guys do that in the Fraser room, though? Come on, you just drank red
course.
wine.
There was no horseplay in the Fraser room.
I brought in a fart machine into the Fraser room.
But I think that the idea is to get a balance. Like in Cold Case, we didn't have a lot of toys. We weren't allowed to have toys at the table.
Okay.
Just corpses.
No, we sadly, we substituted food for the toys.
okay.
But, you know, I think the perfect balance is to have a room where you can just be wild and tell stories and really let your mind go, and then have someone whose job it is to focus and move things
Yeah.
forward. And you know, and those have been the best rooms that
Right.
I've been in, because what can drive you crazy is, here are mistakes. A, after you've pitched your idea 2, maybe 3 times, don't keep pitching it.
Right.
You know, the 16th time, I mean, I don't follow this rule.
We were allowed, you were allowed to come back to stuff periodically and say, like, you know, I know I pitched this, but can I pitch it again?
Yeah.
And when we're having a script, a script taken apart, you could also often say, like, I'm using my chit as the writer to say I want to hear this line. You couldn't do it
Yeah.
for every line, but, you know,
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you can pitch a line, it doesn't go over, and then about 20 minutes later, you're still working on the same joke, the same bit. Then somebody brings it up again. Well, what's that one? It may seem better to the showrunner at that time
Right.
than when they passed over. I mean, a lot of this you're talking about is that concentrated person is the showrunner. And a lot of what your job is when you're on a show, if you're not the showrunner, is trying to figure out what the showrunner's thinking and trying to...
It's so true, and I think, you know, having done both, it's a totally different mindset, because as a showrunner, you can't be the funniest person in the room, you can't be the smartest person in your room. The goal is to create the space for other people to be those, and that's why, to me, it's so fun. I love hearing you talk about, like, the perfect Zen index card, because my thing is the perfect Zen whiteboard, and I'm really rigorous. You've kind of seen this.
We'll talk about about the whiteboard.
Well,
for those
the
people
rule
who
to
don't.
me, the tool of the comedy room is the whiteboard, and I am really rigorous about.
So it's
thank God
it's like
you've
a
never seen
grease
it.
board.
It's very much like this without the logos. But I have a whiteboard, and I have many different colored pens, and I use a certain color for slug lines, and I use a certain color for the action of the scene, and I leave certain amounts of white space depending on how much story I think goes between this scene that we picked and that scene that we picked. And it enables everyone in the room to see, oh, you know what, something's got to go there. We got to figure out how to get from there to there. And if there's no space between, I'm telling people, those are back to back. Those things, that's a hard cut between that scene and that scene. And so I feel my job is actually to make my head as transparent as possible. And always to, again, not to be the guy with the great joke, but to say it's something like, maybe something like, the bad version is, the house number is, it's shaped like, you know, and then I let the smarter, funnier people in the room fill in the blank. Because you can't, it's so funny, I've seen people who have gone up through the ranks and then hit showrunner really grapple with this, because you can be a superstar at number 2, but when you hit number 1, it's a totally different set of skills, and you have to step away from being the shoot from the hip guy, because or the guy who cogitates in the corner, because I've worked with writers like that, and as a person on a staff with someone who's like this, it drives you crazy. Give me something to riff off of. Tell me what it is you want. Otherwise, we're never going to get home.
Well, the other thing is that, you know, it is a skill to be able to point out what's wrong with everybody else's ideas. But, no, seriously.
Yeah.
But it usually works out better if you can also supply an alternative.
Yeah.
And, you know, especially working on a procedural, because a lot of it is just like making a puzzle, and it's about logic. And you know, there's obviously certain things that sort of pass, they don't register on the radar.
Yeah.
But, you know, you can point out, okay, well, wait, that's not really going to work. Why? No one would, you know, shave a cat just because, you know, they had to make an alibi and they were at the groomer shaving their cat, you know. It's like, but, you know, I have found, and this I would say also is true for, even for meetings, like on hiring, you know, people want to hear, if you have like a critique, or they want to hear a suggestion,
Yeah.
even if they don't end up using it.
And sometimes I think there's a distinction, like what you're describing, Jeff, is even though you want people to help you, and you also want to hear what you would say would be their truth about it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important distinction to make, because I've been so fortunate that most of the places I've been, the people in charge were confident enough to be willing to hear something contrary, and even so, especially if couched with a suggestion. We say in comedy rooms, pitch or get off the mound. So, but I think that there are situations that you're in, and certainly I've been in them early on, where, you know, my sense of what good is totally different than the person in charge, and it becomes, it's funny because I recently had a job where I consulted the Writers Guild handbook, where it says, you know, your job is not to do what you think the best show is, but to actually help the showrunner or the creator, sometimes both, achieve what their vision is. And sometimes you're lucky enough to be in a situation where they want to hear what you really have to say, and that's, for me, that's just, you know, wonderful.
It's so true, because I mean, I love this medium because it is collaborative. Otherwise, I'd be off, you know, doing what Jay described. What do I feel like writing today? And the thing you value most as a showrunner is someone who can intelligently contradict you, and who has a case to make and a point of view about the direct, and who can say, you know what, I don't think the answer is over there. I think it's over there, and can actually keep you honest. It's the hardest thing, is to find, because again, everyone wants to get home. So nobody wants to be the person saying, I'm not sure. But if you are that person, and as Jan said, and you have an intelligent suggestion about perhaps if we went this way, you're valued. It's a huge, those are the people that you never let out of your sight. The people who can really keep you, hold you to a high level.
It is a living, breathing organism, and one of the things that is really hard to balance is you want to read the showrunner, but at the same time you're sitting there going, how honest should I be? This whole story doesn't work. They seem really happy with the story. When do I speak up? You know, what's the difference between, you know, if you've done the first draft, you spent more time thinking about that story than anyone else in the room, so you went through a thought process to get where you got to, but if you seem defensive, you will not be invited back. And
it's also another skill to sort of hold your tongue when they're ripping apart your draft, and you know that's part of it too, is to know when to fight. You know.
So, do you have any? I mean, do you feel like that's something you sense out in the moment, or?
Well, you pick your battles. You just say, this is really important to me, or I love that joke, but you know it's a joke. I can kiss. I think jokes for the most part can come and go. Story beats and story moments are more important to me, and if there's a real story moment that doesn't make sense to me and I think is kind of offensive and strange, and that happens a lot, you know, that somebody will put in a story moment and you think, what the fuck? That's my script? It's going to have my name on it? That's the moment I go, really, I'd like to, let's reconsider that moment, shall we? And then try to drum up support with other writers, which is hard to do because, like you say, they want to go home, or one of the other writers, it was his idea to do the horrible thing, and so there's that politics that you have to go through. I mean, you pick and choose your battle. It's just like marriage. You have to pick and choose your battle.
Maybe that's
and
why.
Lose them all.
Maybe that's why my marriage didn't work. I'm sorry. I just took a horrible.
Here, honey,
I had a horrible flashback. Thank you.
She committed. That's important. Committed.
Yeah,
She committed.
see, that's
I was in a room once where I was so lonely, and I felt, and they were nice people, and this is where I worked with Jay's wife for the very first time I worked with her. But and it really changed my concept of what I really questioned everything about myself by the end of that process, and it happened to me recently. Like, it can really turn you around when, you want to feel, my husband always says, you want to feel like your money is good at this bank. And I think that one of the things that I've tried to do over time is to really look at the show and the people and like, are we all going to like each other? If I have a choice in the matter, if it's, a lot of times you don't, or you take a chance on a show, like sometimes great shows aren't necessarily places where your money is going to be good. And it can be really, I don't know, maybe now I'm taking a dark turn too, but it can mess up your mind. You start to feel like...
Well, it's like any time you guys have had a job. Sometimes you feel like, boy, I'm learning a lot, I'm contributing a lot, I like the people I'm working with, I look forward to getting out of bed in the morning. And other times you're just going, I don't understand why this isn't working. Sometimes it's different tastes. Sometimes, as Jan and I were talking about earlier, you're working for a sociopath. That's really hard. That's also what went wrong in my marriage. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, let's say these people are lucky enough to get staffed on a show.
Okay, so it's 1985 or something?
Yeah. We have a time machine.
Okay, sorry.
But what are some of the things, like, one of the things that I tell new writers is, don't be afraid, even though you feel self-conscious and like everybody's noticing what you're doing. The odds are nobody really is noticing what you're doing, at least initially. And I think it's a good idea for people to sit there and kind of try on your thoughts for size with what's going on with the room. See if you can get some confidence. Gee, I thought of that. I had that same story fix. And just make sure that you're kind of on the same page as what else is going on in the room. But do you guys have any other advice for, let's say it is 1985 and
there were jobs.
Or you know what, somebody's got to work on these shows.
Sure.
Somebody's got to work on these shows.
There are still drama shows.
There are
That's
still
true.
drama shows. Just there's no jobs for us.
No, that's right.
Well, you should. If you have your choices, obviously first pick the funniest, best show that you think is great. That's number one. I've been willing to work with complete idiot assholes to work on great shows, and ultimately I've enjoyed them. There have been shows that have been run by people who are perceived crazy, and maybe just brilliantly talented. In any case, those shows have been some of my best, my happiest times, because the creative work was really satisfying. However, that being said, if the show is not so good and you have a really sad person in bad marriage on the show, you'll be there forever.
A sad person in a bad marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't want
yeah,
to go home.
And they don't want to go home, you will just be rewriting for no reason for the rest of your life. And you'll be working weekends, and he just does not want to go home.
Yeah.
And it's just that's a bad scene. If you can fix that, that's good. What else, guys?
Don't pitch things that they already did on the show if you come to a new show, which, you'd be surprised. Like, people don't, because I'm always so scared, I over-homework it, but it's great to feel prepared, like you've really studied the show. And if it's not a new show, obviously, if it's a new show, it's different, but...
Right.
But sometimes it's a sign that you're on the same wavelength if you've pitched an
Really?
idea
You wouldn't
that's similar.
fire me if I did that?
No, if you liked, one of our classic ideas, fantastic.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I hired a writer once who would go home, like if there were certain areas that, we were having problems with in the script, or certain lines that weren't working, and he was the only one on the whole staff who would go home and work on pitches and come back the next day. Sometimes I wouldn't even look at them. Like, I just didn't have time to look at them, but I always knew, there was that time when I would pick this up and go, God bless this guy for going home and putting some thought in. And it goes back to something people were saying earlier, which is it's making that person's life easier who employs you, and you hope will employ you the next season as well.
Well, I have a question.
Go ahead,
sorry.
Lauren.
For you, Robin.
Yeah?
There's making that person's life easier, and then there's making the show work better. Now, if you feel there's a conflict between those two things, where do you come out?
Well, honestly, I really, earlier in my career, I felt it was more important to say if I didn't think it was working. And then I realized, because I've done a lot of consulting on shows, that wasn't necessarily what I was there for, and that my taste may be different than the showrunner's taste. So I was trying to figure out what that person wanted from me.
Right, when you get to the stage of life where you realize you actually want to have the job. You know,
Well,
you
and
need
that
it.
it's not about
Well,
my
what your
taste.
job is.
What the job
At
is,
that
yeah.
moment, it's not about my taste and my judgment. So what I try and do is, let's say I feel like something's not working in the story. I will sit there and I will try and come up with a fix. And I'll try and come up with a fix that will go, that you can just lay, like you can keep as much of the story as works. And where I can, when I pitch it, I can say, this is how it will affect, you know, the whole story. But if I really feel like the showrunner just is thrilled with the episode, unless somebody turns to me and says, Robin, what do you think? I don't say it, because
It's of no value.
it's of no value.
I've done a lot that's of no value. My problem is I have a glass head. And I have learned over the years that everybody always knows what I'm thinking. I'm a really bad liar, and I'm really bad at masking my true feelings. So I found at one point there was a story we were working on in Will and Grace that I absolutely unequivocally despised from end to end. And so I thought, I'm just going to sit in the corner and quietly allow this to roll forward because I have nothing to contribute to this horror that they are wreaking. And eventually all the voices died down and everyone was staring at me. So what I try to do is I'm not as good, I'm not as politic as Robin is, unfortunately. I try and
I'm just
ask.
tired.
I think it's important that, and this is true really no matter what level you're at, you have to be a builder. You have to be someone who, if you're going to say, you can't be the bird all the time. You have to say, this smells bad to me, but what if we this? Or here's a way to make it a little better. I do this, it's funny, both Mark Cherry and I used to write with partners, and I think we are both people as writers who benefit from having someone who can go, maybe we're both that guy. And so I think he and I work well together on the show because there's a level of respect for what each of us do and what our roles are. I don't run the thing. But at the same time, he knows I'm going to keep him honest, and he's going to keep me honest. So I try and be constructive. I try to have some direction. Maybe it's not what you want, and I also shut up after twice.
But have you
Because
ever
you
worked
could-
with somebody who you know is in love with idea X, and it's a horrible idea, whatever it is, and even if you've said, time and time again, experience has taught you, they're going to do their thing, no matter what.
Well, that happened in the case of this story on Will and Grace, the story that I thought was absolutely loathsome. And I actually ended up, I had a little sidebar with the showrunners, and I said, I'm just never going to like this, so I'm just going to stay out of the way while you guys do it. I still think it's one of the worst episodes we ever did. And you can take me aside afterwards, and I'll tell you which one it was. But it was, to me, my problem was it was a very inside the beltway idea. To me, it was an idea that was only appealing to people who write Will and Grace. And so I thought, what are we putting across? My big objection to it was, I don't think we're telling anybody anything they don't already know. This is like saying, we should conserve electricity. I thought it was not a particularly profound observation.
There's a place when you think it can be helpful to say
Yeah.
your piece, and there's a place where you think it can be not helpful and
Right.
destructive. So you have to make that decision about when it's really helpful. It's certainly not helpful on Thursday when you're filming on Friday to say, let's redo everything.
Yeah.
That doesn't help, and people do. There's people in the room who say, "What? I didn't like the story from the beginning," and so you just.
But there are showrunners who do that.
Yeah.
Too.
Well, that's true, but then
Yeah.
they're responsible for fixing it by Friday. But the people who are not the showrunner, who are just sitting there shitting on the show and just souring everybody on it, they're going to make it anyway.
But it's that sourness I'm talking about. I just think you can't be that guy. You just can't be the perpetual no bird. I remember there were times I would come, especially it happened early on Will and Grace and it happened early on Desperate Housewives, where I would come on and I'd say to my wife, I was the no bird today. Today I was the guy who everyone had something they loved, and I was the one saying, I don't know, God. And it's just, you don't want to be that guy. And so it's always important, I think, try and have a smile on your face, especially if you're doing comedy, and try and be upbeat in some way. Try and build. It's very easy to be a terror downer and a critic. But the hardest thing is actually to provide a brick that helps get you where you want to go.
Well, and a lot of it too is, I'm assuming that everybody in this room would probably take a job that they would just take it to be there, and it makes it simpler because you're, like when I think about my early jobs, there was no there was no discrepancy between like my work and my art. It was just my work was no, actually I'm saying that backwards. It wasn't. It was just I would do anything to be a good helper. And then sort of the more successful you get, the more it's like, oh, I don't want my name on, like you start to have to like look at some like figure out how to separate that out and those kinds of things. But I agree. I think if you can sort of take a longer view of it, like this is my first job. This is really hard. I don't agree with anyone. They seem like they really hate women and people of color here. But, how am I going to get through it? And how am I going to get through it in my own, like how can I depend on people in my own life that I already know to keep me to keep me sane and
Or even the show stylistically, if it just if you're a new writer, you take whatever job you can get, and suddenly you're on a show and you go, I don't like the show. I've never liked the show.
Yeah.
Now I have to write it and figure out what it's about, and I think that's really hard. I mean, my first job was on the Tracy Ullman Show, which was a sketch show, and I grew to like it. But when I first saw it, it was 6 episodes that had already been made, and I didn't get it. I was just like, they're ending everything with a song. They're not going for the end of the sketch. There's no funny end to the sketch. What happened here? And but finally I sort of said, okay, well, I'll buy into what they're doing and try my best to write more sketches that end in songs, and and play that game, and not walk in and say, listen, I'm a new guy, but you're going to change the way you do your show.
But it is, that learning curve is really, you gotta, I think the hard thing is when you're a baby writer is to find that middle ground between hanging back, and learning the lay of the land and understanding what the show is, because I had that same thing on Will and Grace, and I was a veteran writer when I started on that show. But when I came in, I was like, I don't know what the fuck a Manolo Blahnik is. I've never had an oxygen facial. I don't know what your people are talking about. So there is that time where you have to kind of figure out what is the show. How do we tell stories here? But you don't want to be the silent person in the corner. Right. So you have to find your way. It's a very tricky business.
I remember, I kind of went through, since I sort of had another, well, not a career in the sense of money making, but I was an independent filmmaker before I started writing television. So
a hobby.
A hobby. And so I felt like, and I had made films and they had been shown in festivals and I had gotten, so I felt like I was already, I am somebody. Which I wasn't, but okay, I was. So anyway, so my first show I worked with my friend Jason Katims on Relativity, and I'll never forget this, and I've learned so much since then. Okay, this was before we even started. I had written a sample script that he really liked, and one day I saw that Jason was planning to make the credits of the writer credits, that there would be a different typeface for the men and the women. That the men were going to be in regular letters and the women were going to be in italics. And
were the eyes going to be dotted with little hearts?
It was actually not part of my job to decide on the graphics of the credits. But I took it upon myself to contribute by going over to Jason's house and telling him that he could not do credits like this. And luckily he was my friend, so I didn't get fired on the second day of the job.
They changed it to woman writer. And then
But I have learned since then that, there's a pleasure and a skill in supporting the vision of the person who created the show. And especially if you really like that person, and if they're a decent person, it makes it more rewarding, even if you think they're wrong creatively.
And it gives you the capital to then argue sometimes when you don't agree. If you've done enough agreeing and enough supporting, and then sometimes people are more apt to listen to you.
I would rather work for somebody, though, who doesn't take my suggestions than somebody who doesn't know what their show is.
Oh, yeah.
And that is the biggest
Absolutely.
stress, is sitting in a room with somebody where every day the show could be anything. And as a showrunner, that was, to me, if you had anything to grab hold of, you knew what the series was about, what your subject matter was that you could come back to. The characters were well defined. I always like to get my writers very invested in the show. When I was show running Grosse Point, and this happens a lot on our shows, we would have the writer almost be the producer of that episode. So they would be involved in casting, they would go to editing, they would be the guy that went down to the set and sort of protected the vision of the show. And what happens is people they're happier because they feel like they're contributing. But one of the things that I found really difficult was when you're the guy in charge was saying no to people. When people, maybe 80% of what people are going to say, you're going to say no to, kind of. So any thoughts on that? How do you keep people invested or,
The people who you're going to say no to 80% of the time?
Yeah.
Fire them as quickly as you can. I'm serious.
Okay, I would say though, if it's Jeff.
First-
Jeff. Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you
No,
off.
no, I was just saying.
interrupted.
First, you try to
Don't
get
do
them,
this in a room.
First, you try. Yes, you can. First, you try to get them on board, right? You try to
Yeah.
say, no, this is. I understand what you're saying, but this is. And after about 4 months of that, you
Okay.
then stop listening to them, and then
Okay,
wait for their option to
good.
be up.
Why don't we open this up for questions, if any? Yes? Yeah? Hold on for 1 second. They're going to get you the mic. I had no segue to the
Can't hear
questions
you.
and got them.
Thanks. Question right to that point. You're in a room, you've got 12 people, you're firing different ideas. What's the ratio of good ideas, would you say, individually to one that's going to sell?
Ratio or other people?
Yeah, I mean, or what's the acceptable ratio where you think, hey, this is a good room, these are good people? You got to have more losers than winners, I would assume.
No, I don't think that's
No?
true. You don't have more losers than you have much more winners than losers, and it's rare to find somebody who's just way off base, and you can spot that guy from a mile away. And when that happens, you sort of go, "We're pulling for you, man. Come through, come through." But oftentimes it doesn't happen, and that person goes away, and that's just how it is. People are really good at what they do. I mean, it's a very competitive field, and people are really trying hard to get into the business, especially comedy writing. And so there's a lot of really smart, funny people available. And if you happen to have the bad luck of choosing one of the unsmart, unfunny people on your show, there's 1,000 really smart, funny people to take in place.
And also, I really agree with what you said about that the room becomes a living, breathing organism. So you'll have hours where nobody's pitching anything good, and it all feels like everyone is just slogging through it. And then when it's good, it's so exciting because it's like every idea, it's like all the heads really do make it better than one person alone. And it can be so exciting because it's like, that's good. Oh no, that's really good too. What are we going to do? So it can be, really
Great. I can't believe I'm using a sports analogy, but it's like if there was a basketball team, and what Alexa was talking about before, it sounds like she did a lot of assists. Well, I'm not exactly sure what an assist is, but you get you get what I'm saying. It's like if you're going to make the basket, but no one gets you the ball, you can't make the basket. Maybe there's another guy who's good at defense, or another guy that's good at the free shots, or good at running. I don't know, something. But you're looking for. It's a team sport. I mean, my background.
I don't know what sport that is with the free shots and the running. I'm not sure what
My
that is.
background and Jay's background was improvisation, so you really learn that you're not, stand-ups don't always adapt as well, I think, to a room as improvisers, because improvisers are used to feeding off one another. One of the questions that was asked was about competition in the room, and you have rooms where people are competitive in a negative way, but you also have where people are competitive in a really positive way. You're feeding people, you want to top people. And because you have that overriding thing, as Jay and Jeff were saying, where you really do want to go home. The hours are long, they're grueling. It can be the most fun thing on the planet, but you're trapped in a room, you're eating out of styrofoam, you're tired. It's a beast that just keeps eating material. And you look up and that material's gone. And so you're almost happy if somebody tops you, as long as you have a few good things that you can think about in the car on the way home. You just need a few.
We had a hat sometimes that you could wear if you came through and everything, and then you'd have to do a victory dance.
Yeah, but we had a thing in a room with Levine and Isaacs where if somebody just pitched a real stinker, you had to go around the room and go, thank you, and shake the hand of everybody in the room.
Take Cold Case, we had a a dancing rabbi who played Hava Nagila that would start if you clapped. So if somebody had a really good idea, everybody would clap, and then the rabbi would start dancing.
That's awesome.
There, yes, gentlemen.
My question's for Jeff. How has the transition been from half hour to hour, and what's the writer's room in Desperate Housewives like?
There's no whiteboard. It's alarming. It's interesting. I haven't found the transition to be that stark, other than the fact that you guys have these cork boards and index cards and stuff. Because so much of Desperate Housewives is peopled with half-hour writers. So, though there is less rewriting, and the rooms tend to be a little bit more pod-like. There is not a lot of stuff that is done in the big central room. It's not that different. And certainly in terms of the way we write the show, it's more gothic and more perverse and darker, but I haven't found it, I found it invigorating. I didn't find it to be like, oh, I don't know how to do this. It was actually surprisingly easy to make that transition. I would think Alexa would have more to say about going to West Wing after having written half hours.
No, I
Surprisingly
mean,
easy?
my first job was Once and Again, and it was a huge transition because mostly what you were talking about earlier about the difference between a kind of communal, everybody decides what's going to be in each scene, and there is a certain ownership when you write a script, and Marta and David were really careful to help us feel like we were having time with it alone to make it our own. So it wasn't like, being dictated to, but the gap was really frightening. And I remember, the guys lying on the floor just like you think they would, and going, maybe there's an act break where they have a fight, and then at the end of the episode they make up. But we need to set them up so this can happen. And then they were like, okay, go. And I was just completely like, and I remember saying, like, do you want to outline? Like, can I give you a 22-page single-space outline where I pitch you what I would do? And they were like, oh, you're so cute. No, a writer writes. And I remember I really cared about it a lot, but I was terrified. And by the time I turned it in, I was like, well, this better, if they don't like this, then I don't even know. I was just so defensive and messed up. But it was terrifying because it was such a different process. So in that case, it was, but I had a lot of good support, and
Well, this is,
yeah, there's a room at West Wing for story breaking. So John uses both kinds of, he uses sort of both, like where we would work on the stories together, and you would pitch an idea you had for an individual episode, but you really did go off and write it yourself. So it's similar to other drama stuff. So.
yes.
Hi. The first thing I learned today, I think, and the most important, is that writers really are a lot more fun and funny than executives.
Very good.
So thank you for ending the day on an up note. You started to talk about this just now, but I'm curious, for instance, about Friends. You'd go into the writer's room, you'd break down the story, or break down the episode rather, to beats, and then what would happen? Would you guys break off, and this person would work on the first, this pair would work on the first act, these pair would work? How was that broken down exactly? Or how was the actual script written?
Well, the story breaking was done communally with the big whiteboard. And what would happen sort of inexorably and without really a sense of self-consciousness about it is a writer or writers would start to gravitate toward one. Either because one central idea was theirs to begin with, or it was their turn, they hadn't written one yet, or it was based on an experience they had, or whatever. And so that would kind of become theirs. And they would be assigned to go off and write an outline based on the beats that were on the board. And they would bring that outline back to the room, and we would all deconstruct it and fix it and say, is this really working? And then they would go off and write the draft. And then they would bring the draft to the room, and that would be collaboratively rewritten by the entire room. But everything up to that point of the outline was really done kind of by all of us, right? And you guys did a little differently in later seasons, right?
I do think that what I liked is that there was really, and I remember the very first season, David had us write down which episodes we were most connected to, and they really tried to like accommodate everybody. What did you guys do? How did you figure that out?
At the class?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Oh, then David still works the same way.
Yeah.
But I mean, at Simpsons and Frasier, Simpsons, we used to write a 30-page single-spaced outline, just as used to, and then that would be the outline, and the script would come in about 65 pages, because there's a lot of description going into cartoons. At Frasier, same thing. We would group, come up with a story. The Simpsons actually had a story conference at the beginning of the year where we would come up with, hopefully, as many of the 24 episodes a year that we were making as possible. Hopefully 15 ideas. And then we'd start with those 15 ideas to try and get scripts going. And then at Frasier, same thing. You sort of did an outline. Everybody ripped it apart. You know, communally made the outline. Everybody ripped it apart. Then you came in with your first draft, and everybody ripped that apart. And from that point on, when it became your first draft, you turned in, unless there was some serious issues with it, where you'd have to do a second draft.
Oh yeah,
It was
right to the room. We never got second drafts on Will and Grace. There was just no time. Yeah. You know, every once in a while, it's like, oh, you know, that second act doesn't work. We're going to re-break it and send you off to write it again. But chances are, when your draft came in, it was going right to the room.
And there's some places where you don't get to leave the writer's room. You have to write it on your spare time. So you have to write it on weekends and nights and all that stuff because you're still in the writer's room. It's much, you dream of the time when you say, no, take a week and write it yourself. You know, that's
So other than sandwiches, another thing that you've learned today is spend a lot of time working on your voice, and then you'll get on a show and your draft will be thrown out. You've got to sit there and act like you don't care when everyone's acting like you didn't write it down at all. In some cases, sometimes a showrunner literally just wants the stimulation of a draft. You know, where
you also know when your draft is being ripped apart different than everybody else's draft. You know when it's like it's a bad scene. You know, you see somebody turn in their script and it's completely rewritten page one, and you feel bad. And even though everybody agreed this was a good story, and even though there was a consensus and the showrunner said, no, I like that, and do this way, and you did it that way, then they're still ripping it apart. Your gut. You know, you just feel so horrible.
And sometimes it's your fault, and sometimes it's really not your fault, because again, that sort of express train, feed the beast.
Right, and they give you
sometimes you just go, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Right, they give you a sweatshirt when it's not your fault, and you get to wear. Oh no, you just have to suffer.
Yes, in the back there. Microphone.
Wait for your microphone.
I was wondering if any of you remember experiences with a staff writer in the room recently that really handled being a new person on the team well, and how they handled it. And I was also wondering about the interview after people like your spec script that gets you the job, if there's anything in particular you remember about what really nailed the job for you to get in the room, and if that interview is really about how you're in the room, what's your strategy about how to handle that?
Well, I just went through this with the show that didn't go. And I had the opportunity after quite a while to read spec material and then meet with writers. I was surprised on a couple of occasions that people did not come in prepared to talk intelligently and critically about the show. I think you've got to come in with ideas, and you have to have thought about the thing and the relationships and maybe where it might go. I used to blindside people when I was interviewing writers for Will and Grace, and I'd say, where do you think Will and Grace are going to be in 5 years? And people would look at me with this completely glassy-eyed look like, I didn't expect you to ask me questions. And I think you have to be prepared to talk intelligently about the show. The people that I gravitated to the most during this process were the people who said, you know what I'd like to see more of, or you know what I thought her background might be, or you know what I thought that moment was about, or you know what I thought you meant by that, or what if she, or what if he. That kind of intelligent thinking about the show, I think, is enormously important. I think what Alexa said, you got to know the show cold as well. If you come in and start talking about ideas they've already done or things that are off the map, so off the map of where they are that they don't make sense, that's bad too. But the thing that I found, I may be idiosyncratic in this regard as a showrunner, because I don't really care so much about people's ability to tell an ironclad, clean story, or about their ability to craft the perfect joke, or to an extent, I care about their ability to write in the voices of characters. But again, that's all. As the showrunner, it's my job to stay on top of all those things. The thing that I find most elusive is somebody who has anything to say, or any of their own experience to bring to bear on a series. And so the thing I find I always respond to the most is when somebody says, you know, when I lived in New York, I had a Will in my life, and he and I used to blah, 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 and immediately I'm like leaning forward. Whereas if people just say, you know what's funny is I was at the gym and they have nothing to, so I'm always looking for point of view. I know that gets thrown around a lot, but that phrase, but it really is about not just do you have the technical mastery, but do you have any of your own experience or of your own voice that you can breathe into the material?
If I worked for Jeff, I would take an idea that I thought of and say, this really happened to me.
That's right.
I might have a better chance of selling it to you.
Very smart.
Yeah.
No,
Yes.
I think definitely why you and not someone else is a big thing to go into. And it's also a way to get yourself connected with the material, especially if it isn't something that you would necessarily, like I interviewed at, what was the one with the Olsen twins?
Oh.
Yeah, so I interviewed
You
on
look
that.
just like me.
Yeah, I interviewed on that show as a possible first job, and like I had to try to figure out how to come to it and why I would have something to say about it. So it's like casting. You have to like help them understand where to put you in a way, like how you're right for it. So.
Yeah.
But to get in the door, you've read somebody's script and you must really like it for
Yeah.
the most part, and that's a big leg up.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, it's just a chemistry thing. You know, some of the time, it's you know, if you knock yourself in the head and do all this work and then you still don't get the job, it's not necessarily anything you did or anything you said. There's just sometimes it's a chemistry thing or it's something. There's a vibe in the room. It really is like you know, a bad version of dating, and you know it'll either happen or it won't a lot of the time. But the script itself, I mean, your time's so limited. You wouldn't take an interview with somebody who you didn't think was at least good, and you like the script, and that's a lot.
Yeah.
I definitely think for a new show, you should definitely start with what you really liked about the show, why you connected with it, and I think you should definitely come in prepared with some other ideas, or at least, you know, you said something before, Jeff, that I thought was, you know, it was almost like phrasing something as a question when you were talking to Mark Cherry or whatever. Yeah. And these are good words to start sentences with. I was wondering where you were going to go with that. You know, and like Jeff said, personal stories. When I met Alexa in another writer's room, and I called her up and just said if she wanted, you know, to have lunch, and I kept trying to hire her on different things, because she had so many stories that were so relevant to what I was working on. I'm going, this is somebody who can have a story that maybe I can build an episode on, that I can have a juicy scene, I could picture things. Chemistry is really important. Does the person have a good energy? Do you, you know, again, people said today, you're married to those people. But you know, genuine flattery, specific stories, chemistry, and phrase things as questions. I was wondering, what did you think?
Even in really high-end writers' rooms where you have a lot of veterans who have been doing it for a long time, you hear the phrase "what if" a lot. A lot. As a matter of fact, that's a lot of the game. As people are discussing stories or jokes, what if Will does this, or what if Grace thing? People very rarely are declarative. You almost never hear somebody say, she's got to do this.
Well, I think part of that is because you want people to feel like it's a collaborative process, and so, I mean, maybe this is just how I justify it in my own mind, but it's like, could it be like, you know, it's like I'm throwing it out there and I want to see if somebody, you know, if it gets picked up. I mean, sometimes I do it when I have an agenda to promote too. So it's not all quite that organic.
I want to ask Jan, since, you know, when you're going up for a show that is more of a procedural show, and you're not necessarily going to go in and go, when my friend got murdered. You know, how do you prepare when you go in?
That's a good question.
When you go in to pitch a show, what kind, you know, what are those meetings like?
Well, oddly enough, you know, okay, I'll tell you. You know, I worked on, the first procedural show I worked on was Michael Mann's Robbery Homicide. And I made the transition from sort of relationship shows by adapting James Elroy's memoir, My Dark Places, which was really a family love story. It's about his mother's unsolved murder. And in the course of investigating it, he really finds out who his mother was. He never finds out who the killer was. And so, you know, on Robbery Homicide, Michael Mann does a lot of research, and another writer and I were on a ride-along, and we got into a gun battle. We were in a gang neighborhood, and a two-striker. He was like in the wrong gang area or something. They made a U-turn to talk to him. If they had searched him and found a gun, that would have been his third strike, and he just stepped in front of the car and started shooting at us. And it ended up being like over 25 shots were fired. It was, so that actually.
Well, Will and Grace once, I was inadvertently served someone else's Campari and soda.
Yeah. But, so oddly enough, it was kind of, look, obviously it was scary when it was happening, but given that, we didn't get seriously injured except when we crashed into the tree, but that experience gave me an insight into police work and the victims, and I testified at the trial. I mean, and it sort of made me like very close to cops because you have a certain street cred when you've been through something. It's true. Wow, she like. The cop who was driving, who's a very close friend of mine now, would say to me, "Hey, our shooting is really popular. Like finally, I'm popular." And
it's hard as you were telling this. I'm sitting here going, I can just picture being in that car thinking, if I survive this is gonna be the best story. I can get so much work off this.
Actually, that's
surviving a shooting.
While the shooting was going on, I was thinking, where should I put my head? That was the only, but after it, after I survived, I think that experience has gotten me jobs.
Wow.
For sure.
Another tip. Yes. I'm just trying to, sum up the day.
Back to a little bit of somebody was talking about that you were starting to answer, Jeff. You said you had some time, you started reading some specs, and this is open for everybody who's in this position. The specs that you read, are they, specs of various existing shows? Are they original pilots? Are they one-act plays? Are they, features? What sort of stuff do you read?
Well, I'm not a good example in this regard because I think, and maybe it's weariness from having done this a while, I get tired of reading the 39th spec, The Office. I did hire a writer once based on a spec, That Girl, which was really, really awesome. It didn't work out, but she had tried to write something that would stand out in the pile, and it certainly did. I like to read original material. I'll read anything. I'll read 120 pages of a feature. I'm a fast reader. I would rather, as I said, in pursuit of someone with a voice and a story to tell, I would much rather see what someone does with a blank page and, something they're passionate about. I read plays. I read newspaper articles. There was, is it Bruce J. Friedman, who used to be a cartoonist? No, not Bruce J. Friedman. Bruce Kaplan. I remember when he was first shopping himself as a writer, he would include in his packet like some of his New Yorker cartoons. Great writer, by the way. So I look for just any evidence that somebody has a point of view and a story to tell. I know.
I don't think that's unusual. I think that these days that's what a lot of people are doing. Yeah.
Do you want to read a spec TV show first, or would you read original material first?
With this show that I wrote a show about a 42-year-old woman, and so everyone was sending me Sex and the City, which is a show that I totally and unreservedly loathe. People would want.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, really? We've never. Oh yeah. So the problem was that the show that would probably have been the best sample for my series, I couldn't read because I couldn't stand it. But I don't really care. I think maybe Jay is right. The winds seem to be blowing in a different direction, especially in comedy. I think because. The comedy in general is in a recession of sorts, but I think what are the shows you would want to spec right now? There's The Office, that's good. Earl is good. 30 Rock is good. When we were coming up, there were 15 great comedies you would kill to work on, and so there just aren't as many interesting shows to write specs of. And so I think that's one of the reasons, I guess, original material is kind of breaking through, is what showrunners want to read.
My agent used to, tell me it, or agents in general would say, okay, that, you don't have the right material for that show. But my actual experience has been that the better showrunners, smarter showrunners, they want to see a good writer.
Yeah.
They want to see someone with an original voice who can write. So it's not a matter of matching,
Yeah.
They're not that shallow.
When I was staffing partners, I had one slot open, and I was calling all the agents, and I said, I'm looking for another guy, and maybe something. And one agent sent me he said, I have this guy, he comes from drama, but he's got a Spec Northern exposure, would you read that? And I'm like, sure. And I read it. It was a really, really nice piece of writing. And I had this guy in, and he had never worked on a half-hour comedy before. But I remember saying to my partner after we met with the guy, I said, 20 minutes with that guy, the quality of the discourse in the room went way up. Just the things we were discussing, his insights into the show. And